Before World War II, the Philippines was under American sovereignty, functioning as a commonwealth since 1935. The archipelago was on track for full independence by 1946, a promise enshrined in the Tidings-McDuffie Act of 1934. The pre-war period was marked by a steady progression towards self-governance, economic development, and the nurturing of a sense of national identity among Filipinos. The Philippines was also experiencing significant infrastructure growth, with the development of roads, schools, and hospitals under the American colonial government. Manila, the capital, was becoming a bustling hub of commerce and culture, blending both Western and Asian influences. However, despite the visible progress, the Philippines remained a predominantly agricultural society, with vast disparities between the rich and poor. On the geopolitical front, the looming threat of Japanese expansionism in Asia had not gone unnoticed. The Japanese invasion of Manchuria in 1931 and the Sino-Japanese War in 1937 were clear signs of Japan's imperial ambitions. In response, the U.S. fortified its military presence in the Philippines. The establishment of key military installations, including Clark Air Base and the Subic Bay Naval Base, underscored the strategic importance of the Philippines in the U.S. defense posture in the Pacific. While the Filipino populace continued to enjoy relative peace and stability, the clouds of war were gathering. The Philippines' geographic location, lying directly on the route between Japan and the resource-rich regions of Southeast Asia, made it a target for Japanese aggression. Yet, many Filipinos and Americans alike hoped that the archipelago might avoid the conflict that was consuming Europe and China. The tranquility in the Philippines was violently disrupted on December 8, 1941, just hours after the attack on Pearl Harbor. The Japanese launched a coordinated assault on American air bases in the Philippines, targeting Clark Field and IBA Airfield on Luzon. This surprise attack crippled the U.S. Far East Air Force, destroying dozens of aircraft on the ground and severely weakening the air defenses of the Philippines. The Japanese invasion force, composed of seasoned troops who had already seen action in China, swiftly moved to establish beachheads across Luzon. On December 10, 1941, Japanese troops landed at the northern and southern ends of the island. The sheer speed and ferocity of the Japanese advance caught the defenders off guard. General Douglas MacArthur, the commander of the United States Army Forces in the Far East, USAF, had initially planned to defend the Philippines by holding key positions on the beaches. However, the overwhelming Japanese assault forced him to change tactics. On December 22nd, the Japanese main force landed at Lingayen Gulf, north of Manila, and quickly began advancing towards the capital. The defenders, a mix of American and Filipino forces, were outnumbered, outgunned, and unprepared for the intensity of the Japanese assault. MacArthur, recognizing the futility of holding Manila, declared it an open city on December 26th to avoid its destruction, and began executing War Plan Orange 3, which called for a strategic retreat to the Bataan Peninsula. The retreat to Bataan marked the beginning of one of the most grueling and heroic episodes of World War II. The Battle of Bataan, which lasted from January 7th to April 9th, 1942, saw 76,000 Filipino and American troops, along with thousands of civilian volunteers, dig in for a desperate defense against the advancing Japanese forces. The defenders of Bataan faced unimaginable hardships. Supplies were scarce, and the troops suffered from severe shortages of food, medicine, and ammunition. The tropical heat and jungle conditions contributed to the spread of diseases such as malaria, dengue fever, and dysentery, which claimed more lives than enemy bullets. Despite these challenges, the defenders showed incredible resilience, repelling numerous Japanese attacks. The Battle of Bataan was marked by intense combat in dense jungles and mountainous terrain. The Japanese, under the command of General Masaru Homma, launched relentless assaults, but the defenders, despite their inferior numbers and equipment, managed to hold their ground for 3 months. The defense of Bataan became a symbol of resistance and courage, not just for the Philippines, but for the entire Allied cause in the Pacific. However, by April 1942, the situation had become untenable. With supplies exhausted and reinforcements unable to reach them due to the Japanese blockade, the defenders were forced to surrender. On April 9, 1942, Major General Edward P. King Jr. reluctantly surrendered the remaining 76,000 troops, leading to one of the most infamous episodes of the war, the Bataan Death March. The Bataan Death March was a brutal forced march of over 60 miles from Mariveles to San Fernando, and then by train to Capiz, Tarlac. During the march, thousands of Filipino and American prisoners of war were subjected to extreme brutality by their Japanese captors. Without adequate food, water, or medical care, many died from exhaustion, dehydration, or were executed for falling behind. It is estimated that between 5,000 to 18,000 Filipinos and 500 to 650 Americans perished during the march. After the fall of Bataan, the island fortress of Corregidor, located at the entrance to Manila Bay, became the final bastion of Allied resistance in the Philippines. Corregidor, known as the Rock, was heavily fortified with coastal artillery, anti-aircraft guns, and a network of underground tunnels that provided shelter for the troops and command centers. Under the command of General Jonathan Wainwright, the defenders of Corregidor continued to resist Japanese attacks despite being cut off from resupply and reinforcement. The Japanese subjected Corregidor to intense bombing and artillery shelling, turning the once formidable fortress into a wasteland of rubble. On May 5th to 6th, 1942, the Japanese launched a final assault on Corregidor, landing troops on the island's northern coast. Despite fierce resistance, the exhausted and outnumbered defenders were unable to hold back the Japanese advance. On May 6, 1942, General Wainwright, recognizing the hopelessness of the situation and wanting to prevent further loss of life, surrendered Corregidor to the Japanese. The fall of Corregidor marked the end of organized Allied resistance in the Philippines and led to the full occupation of the archipelago by Japanese forces. The Japanese occupation of the Philippines, which lasted from 1942 to 1945, was a period of immense suffering and hardship for the Filipino people. The Japanese sought to integrate the Philippines into their Greater East Asia co-prosperity sphere, an imperialist agenda disguised as a liberation movement from Western colonialism. However, the reality was starkly different. The occupation was characterized by widespread atrocities committed by the Japanese military. The Kempeitai, the Japanese military police, enforced brutal control over the population, using fear, torture, and executions to suppress any form of resistance. Filipino men and women were subjected to forced labor, with many sent to work on construction projects or in factories to support the Japanese war effort. Agricultural produce was confiscated, leading to food shortages and famine scenarios. The puppet government established by the Japanese, headed by President Jose P. Laurel, was largely ineffective and unpopular. While the Japanese promoted the idea of Asia for Asians, their policies were exploitative and oppressive. The Philippine economy was severely disrupted, with inflation skyrocketing and essential goods becoming scarce. The Japanese currency, known as Mickey Mouse money, became virtually worthless, exacerbating the economic hardships faced by the population. Amidst the occupation, however, a resilient spirit of resistance persisted. Guerrilla movements sprang up across the country, with Filipinos taking to the mountains and jungles to fight the occupiers. These guerrilla fighters, many of whom were former soldiers, farmers, and students, conducted sabotage operations, ambushed Japanese patrols, and provided vital intelligence to the Allied forces. The guerrilla warfare conducted by groups such as the Hagbalahap, Hukbong Bayan Laban Sa Hapon, in central Luzon, and the Hunters ROTC guerrillas played a crucial role in undermining Japanese control and keeping the hope of liberation alive. The guerrilla resistance in the Philippines was one of the most effective in any occupied country during World War II. The guerrilla movements were diverse, ranging from leftist groups like the Hagbalahap to more conservative groups such as the Hunters ROTC and the Free Philippines movement. Despite their differences in ideology and goals, these groups were united in their determination to resist the Japanese occupation. The guerrilla fighters faced tremendous challenges, operating in the dense jungles and rugged mountains. They were often cut off from supplies and had to rely on the support of local communities. The Japanese responded with brutal counterinsurgency measures, launching mopping-up operations that targeted both guerrillas and civilians suspected of aiding them. Villages were burned, and civilians were massacred in retaliation for guerrilla attacks. Despite these hardships, the guerrillas managed to inflict significant damage on the Japanese forces. They disrupted supply lines, conducted ambushes, and gathered intelligence that was crucial for the eventual Allied return. The guerrillas also established free zones in remote areas where they set up their own governments, schools, and training camps, providing a semblance of normalcy and resistance governance in the midst of war. The U.S., recognizing the value of the guerrilla efforts, began supplying them with weapons, ammunition, and other resources through submarine deliveries and airdrops. These supplies bolstered the effectiveness of the guerrilla forces, allowing them to maintain pressure on the Japanese even as the occupation dragged on. One of the most notable guerrilla leaders was Luis Turuk, who led the Hagbalahap, a communist-aligned movement that played a significant role in resisting the Japanese, especially in central Luzon. The Hooks not only fought the Japanese, but also worked to protect the local population from the atrocities of the occupation. Other leaders, such as Colonel Claude Thorpe and Captain Ramon Magsaysay, who would later become a prominent political figure and president of the Philippines, organized and unified various resistance groups, coordinating their efforts with the broader Allied strategy. The guerrilla resistance kept the spirit of Filipino nationalism alive and demonstrated the resilience of the Filipino people. It also laid the groundwork for the rapid re-establishment of authority when the Allies began their liberation campaign. By the time of MacArthur's return, much of the country's interior was already under guerrilla control, which significantly aided the Allied advance. In October 1944, the long-awaited return of General Douglas MacArthur to the Philippines marked the beginning of the end of Japanese occupation. MacArthur had been forced to flee the Philippines in 1942, but his vow, "I shall return," had become a symbol of hope for the Filipino people. Operation Musketeer, the code name for the liberation of the Philippines, began with a landing at Leyte on October 20th, 1944. The Leyte Gulf landing was a massive amphibious operation involving hundreds of ships and over 174,000 troops. It was also accompanied by the largest naval battle in history, the Battle of Leyte Gulf, which took place from October 23rd to 26th, 1944. The battle resulted in a decisive victory for the Allies, effectively destroying the Japanese Navy's ability to conduct large-scale operations and securing the sea lanes needed to support the ground campaign. The landings at Leyte were met with fierce resistance from Japanese forces, who were determined to hold the Philippines. The fighting was brutal, with Japanese troops utilizing suicide charges, booby traps, and fortified positions to slow the Allied advance. However, the combination of American firepower and the support of Filipino guerrillas allowed the Allies to make steady progress. Following the liberation of Leyte, the Allies launched a series of operations to liberate the rest of the Philippines. The most significant of these was the Battle of Luzon, which began in January 1945. Luzon, the largest and most populous island in the Philippines, was the key to controlling the entire archipelago. The battle for Luzon was intense, with American and Filipino forces encountering stiff Japanese resistance, particularly in the mountains and the city of Manila. The Battle of Manila, which lasted from February 3rd to March 3rd, 1945, was one of the bloodiest urban battles of World War II. The Japanese defenders, commanded by Rear Admiral Sanji Iwabuchi, conducted a brutal last-ditch defense, leading to widespread destruction and the deaths of over 100,000 civilians. The city was left in ruins, with much of its historical and cultural heritage destroyed. Despite these horrors, the liberation of the Philippines continued. By July 1945, most of the country had been freed, though some Japanese forces, led by General Tomoyuki Yamashita, continued to resist in the mountainous regions of northern Luzon. These remnants of the Japanese army fought on until Japan's formal surrender in August 1945, following the atomic bombings of Hiroshima and Nagasaki. The end of World War II brought both relief and immense challenges to the Philippines. The country was devastated, with its infrastructure in ruins and its economy shattered. Manila, once known as the Pearl of the Orient, was one of the most devastated cities of the war, second only to Warsaw in terms of destruction. The loss of life was staggering, with an estimated 1 million Filipinos killed during the war. The task of rebuilding the nation was daunting. The newly independent Philippine government, granted full sovereignty on July 4, 1946, had to address the immediate needs of its people while also dealing with the long-term challenges of reconstruction. The United States provided significant financial aid through the Philippine Rehabilitation Act and the Bell Trade Act, but the conditions attached to this aid, including preferential trade agreements and parity rights for American businesses, fueled nationalist resentment. Socially, the war had left deep scars. The experience of occupation, resistance, and liberation had reshaped Filipino society, bringing to the fore issues of collaboration, loyalty, and national identity. The war also left a legacy of political and social instability, as various factions that had emerged during the conflict, including the Hagbalahap, continued to influence post-war politics. Despite these challenges, the war also brought a renewed sense of national pride and unity. The bravery of Filipino soldiers and guerrillas, the resilience of civilians, and the ultimate victory over the occupiers became sources of inspiration for the post-war generation. The war underscored the importance of independence, self-reliance, and the need for a strong national defense. The memory of World War II continues to shape the Philippines today. Commemorations such as the Araw and Cajetingan Day of Valor honor the sacrifices of those who fought in Bataan, Corregidor, and throughout the country. Museums, monuments, and memorials, such as the Bataan Death March Memorial and the Filipino Heroes Memorial, serve as reminders of the nation's wartime history and the lessons learned from it. The history of the Philippines during World War II is a testament to the enduring strength and resilience of its people. Faced with overwhelming odds, they fought not only for survival, but for the future of their nation. The war brought out the best and worst in humanity, acts of incredible bravery and sacrifice, as well as unspeakable cruelty and suffering. As the Philippines emerged from the war, it did so with a renewed sense of purpose and a commitment to building a nation that could stand on its own. The experiences of World War II left an indelible mark on the country, shaping its identity and its path forward. Today, the story of the Philippines during World War II serves as a powerful reminder of the costs of war, the value of freedom, and the unbreakable spirit of a people determined to overcome even the greatest of adversities.